Why don't you repeat after me, Colleen? I am not a doctor.
I am not a doctor.
I do not play a doctor on TV.
I do not play a doctor on TV.
And none of the information in this podcast that comes out of my mouth or Eric's mouth.
None of the information on this podcast that comes out of my mouth or Eric's mouth
is intended as medical advice.
Is intended as medical advice.
And if you have any questions or doubts about anything,
if you have any questions or doubts about anything,
you should consult with a licensed physician.
You should consult with a licensed physician.
Modern. We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
Hey there, cocktail fans. As you may have guessed from the little disclaimer before the intro sequence, today's episode involves cocktails and your health. Now, I may not be chatting with a licensed medical physician, but my guest, Colleen O'Bryant from Wild Roots Apothecary, has a ton of awesome insights on how we can build a healthier relationship with cocktails and alcohol in general. She's also an expert herbalist, and this episode is filled with super fun ways to incorporate herbs into your cocktail creations. Some of the things we cover in our discussion include Colleen's journey from office management to spirited herbalist, her fairy cocktail hour, the regenerative properties of skunk, cabbage, dandelions, and other herbs, the arts of scouting and foraging, DIY bitters and infused spirits, our favorite herbal liqueurs, and much, much more. I have a feeling this is going to be one of the most popular episodes of this podcast, and so I hope you enjoy my interview with Colleen O'Bryant. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Eric Kozlik, and today I have a very special guest with me. She's been a good friend of mine for a few years now, ever since we met at Union Kitchen here in DC, and we've sort of grown up together learning about how to produce cocktail mixers and products. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Colleen O'Bryant of Wild Roots Apothecary.
Hey, Eric.
Thanks for joining me today. I think that we should just jump right in by having you talk about who you are, what you do, and I guess how that relates to cocktails.
Sure. That makes sense. So I'm Colleen O'Bryant. I had started a company about 2 years ago. As of May 8th, I got my last paycheck from an official company and started Wild Roots Apothecary with just the dream of growing and being in nature a little bit more. And so I started that about 2 years ago, where I would just grow herbs and cut them and sell them at farmers markets. And what ended up happening is I realized very quickly that herbs don't sell very well, and they're very expensive to kind of keep up that habit. So what it turned into was a cocktail and soda syrup business, and I do introductions to different herbs, and by making these syrups that are like elderberry lavender, so I get to introduce to people. Elderberries are great for the immune system, really building and supporting. They're also really good for your bronchial function. So I just get to talk about that, and then I get to talk to them about a good cocktail. So
nice. Yeah. And speaking of cocktails, we're actually sipping on basically an herbal version of a cocktail based on what I had available, which was ginger and mint teas, and then a little bit of gin, a tiny splash of dry vermouth, and some embitterment lavender bitters. So kind of the DC version, my pantry's version of the theme of your company. But can you talk about maybe some of the products that you make and the flavors that you use? You can feel free to just, run down the entire line if you want.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to do that. I have a small problem. I'm definitely a maker. I think that's one of my creative bents, is that I can't stop making, whereas Eric and crew have come up with a solid line of amazing bitters. I just keep on making. So at this point, we have 4 standardized cocktail syrups. We have 2 honeys that are infused with tulsi and rose, and then we also and a ginger and cinnamon, and then we also have a thing called an oxymel, which is slightly like a shrub in flavor, but we use the vinegar to extract the medicinal benefits or quote unquote wellness benefits from it, and then we add a little bit of honey to make it more palatable. So we have a peppercorn turmeric, a rose hawthorn, and a ruby fire. So that's kind of the standard line as we speak for Wild Roots Apothecary. And then we also have a small shop out in DC where we make custom blends and small batch bitters and syrups and all kinds of stuff. It's a little bit nutty, but I can't help myself.
And that's outside of DC, right? In
Sparrowville.
In Sparrowville, Virginia, which is I drove there recently, and it's a beautiful drive. Cell service not so great, but you have some pretty auspicious neighbors, right?
Yeah. So randomly enough, my landlords are actually Copper Fox Distillery, based out of there, and they actually sell our syrups at the shop, and now they actually opened a sunset cocktail bar starting like last week, so you can have a nice little cocktail using our syrups and their stuff on the deck.
That's great. And is that based on new legislation that just opened up some things, or is that kind of like a financial thing for them?
I don't know if it's a financial thing, of more of just bodies and doing things. They did in the winter they batch up a lot of rye and whiskey and get everything running, and now they're kind of in that bottle sell. So I think they did a little rearranging on their management and just have made it this gorgeous little place that you can just plunk out and the kids can come. It's a great scene, to be honest.
Very cool. So I think moral of the story, get out to Sperryville, check out some interesting products, and also do a whiskey tasting. Copper Fox is really interesting. I believe they are one of the few, if not the only places that malts their own whiskey and peats it as well. And
I think they use apple wood in some way, shape, or form, because we have a whole bunch of apple trees just plowed up in there. So
very
good
cool.
Space, good people.
Yeah. So the reason why we have Colleen today here with us is because I want to talk about alcohol, and more specifically cocktails, but I guess zooming out a little bit, the effects of cocktails on the body. And Colleen has a really, really cool perspective, in my opinion, on this, because as we mentioned in sort of a disclaimer, she's not a doctor in the way that you break your ankle and you go see the doctor, but she is somebody who cares deeply about wellness benefits in the way that we treat our bodies and in the way that we interact with nature and consume the things that grow. So can you talk about maybe the path that you took to, like, how did you cultivate, pun intended, this interest in the connection between nature and the body, and then maybe connect that to cocktails if you could?
I'll do my best, for sure. I think for me, the idea of having a cocktail at the end of the day or every couple days, it feels rewarding and relaxing. And the way I I'll start with the cocktails first, Eric, is just, for me, it's like I said before, I'm a maker, so I love making things. I see what's in nature. I see the red clovers. I see the black locust flowers. I see things, and I want to put them into my body. And so I kind of created this so I don't feel guilty about drinking, every couple days. This little, what I call a fairy cocktail hour, and everybody's invited. And I just make small cocktails and just have one and do beautiful photographs. And I'm blessed to have, 2 acres to roam around in. But I do feel like our mindfulness in nature and just knowing what's there and experiencing it while we can is a good thing. I think my path started, I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago. Everything feels a little blurry. I took a bunch of nutrition courses and started doing that path on nutrition and just really seeing how the body physiologically was affected by food. And then we always would mention herbs. We'd mention herbs like ashwagandha or astragalus and all these kind of adrenal adaptogen herbs, which, when I say that, adrenal adaptogens are a way for the body to adapt to stressful circumstances. And I think that those words kept playing back to me at the time. I was in a very stressful management job. I am a fiery Capricorn, so I can't help myself sometimes. I get involved and I want to fix things. And so I was in this job that just kind of sucked the life out of me. There was no nature in it. There was no nurturing. It was just get the job done and then just keep going and going. So anyways, I was taking these courses on the side, pursuing kind of my dream of using food as medicine. And what ended up happening is the herbs kept coming back to me. And I went out to Sperryville and had a free consult with my teacher and mentor now, Teresa Boardwine of Green Comfort Herbal School out there in Castleton, Virginia, and had a free consult, had no idea what I was getting myself into. And all of a sudden I was, looking at herbs in a different way and looking at bitters and looking at adrenal adaptogens and just trying to find my herb to make me feel better. And I think that's the really interesting thing about herbs is it's a whole body perspective. We look at the herbs and we're going, okay, the motherwort we harvest her when she's flowering, and motherwort's a great bitter. And she's flowering and we cut her and she gives us heart protection. So that's kind of my philosophy, is using the cocktail end of it to create a connection with our bodies, but then also creating a connection with the earth and finding these new plants that are everywhere. One of my favorite bitters to use is dandelion bitters, and especially now, oh my gosh, they're so bitter.
And this is just so folks can situate it. We're in like early to mid spring here in the DC, Virginia area.
Yeah. So I'll use the flowering tops of dandelion flowers to help kiddos that have some issues, constipation and that kind of thing. And then I'll go into the herbs with the leaves and stems, and then eventually, like now, I'm harvesting the roots and just kind of making these really simple bitters. I think my thing is just starting really simple and then adding on. I start with, like, I harvested some cardoon the other day from our garden, and it was like, because we have too much of it. And cardoon's a relative of the artichoke, so it kind of has that really bitter leaf. And normally when you're cooking it, and it's, you blanch it once or twice and then you add it to the saute pan. But this one I put straight up, and it's this really fruity, kind of nutty flavor, and just I can feel the way it's going into going to play really well with some sort of lemony cocktail that's going to happen soon. But yeah, so just kind of seeing nature as it is, and the whole plant constituents to healing the body is kind of how I work.
Nice. I definitely want to dig into a couple things you said there, but I also happen to know that you've got a really interesting project up right now. Is that something that you can speak about a little bit? Knowing that this podcast is probably not going to air for a month at least.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. As I kind of venture on this journey, to say the least, things keep happening that support my path. Cocktails weren't part of my picture. My actual product line came about because I made some lemonade for my son 3-4 years ago, I guess it would be now, and it was not sweet enough, and I happened to have a little thing of elderberry syrup that I poured in there really quickly because I was like, he's just got to drink it, and he loved it and I loved it, and then I added vodka, and it was
and then it was mom's lemonade.
And then I did about 3 months of research and development with friends, and just kind of really struck a chord with me just to see the resonance in people, and cocktails are so accessible. So speaking of what Eric's talking about, is actually in Sperryville we are opening a little, I want to almost call it my lab, because the owners are letting me basically create these cocktails that are herbally based, mostly kind of using the classic spin, but using local ingredients that we can harvest and do short runs on them. So I was telling Eric I harvested some black locust, which is the pods, which are in bloom right now, and they're really sweet and florally. And normally what I would do with them, I usually make like a fritter with them. Like, it's kind of a traditional thing. You make these little pancakes with them and put some honey on top, and they're delicious. But I just put it into some honey and added a little bit of Everclear, and we're going to see what happens with that. So kind of trying to play, and we're going to be open a fair amount, but you can find us at I think it's bar-francis.com, and we'll start having updates soon with that.
Great. Yeah. And I'll put links and social media handles for that in the show notes, as I always try to do. I'm sure that Colleen and I will have to have an email session after this to get all the links to the herbal school that she mentioned, and everything else that's going to come out, and maybe how to spell adrenal adaptogens. But yeah, so that's really great. A couple things that I just want to circle back on, not even to discuss, but just to put a pin in and bring to the level of consciousness for everybody. Two things: simplicity and complexity. Talking about, starting things really simple. You talked about how that's something that you always try to do. And then the other thing is seasonality. It seems like the lab is kind of a season, it has the space for you to do seasonal things and not feel pressured to, as we do in the consumer packaged goods space, like produce a certain number of these, design a label for this particular product, which costs a certain amount of money that you then need to make up. And it's easier to make up if you can then sell X number. So taking those really logistical pressures off, it doesn't even seem to be. I know for a fact that it's a really nice thing for you, but seasonality has other things that I'd like to talk about here as we go. So I want to get into a few questions now. And the first one is, alcohol is bad for us, right? We're taught that alcohol, when we're kids, we're taught that alcohol is bad, and for kids, alcohol is bad. I'm not saying it's not, but is alcohol bad for you, or is it not? Because we're talking about cocktails here, and we like cocktails, but we're told that alcohol is bad for us. So I guess the question is, what gives?
Yeah, sure. This is one of those things that, as an herbalist, I struggle with a lot. I am constantly going, okay, make these cocktail syrups, and they're meant to be enjoyed, but on a limited basis. I think one of our things in our society is that cocktails used to be used as a medicinal dose. And when we say medicinal dose, it was less than 2 ounces. Our standard cocktails now is 6 to 8 ounces. And sometimes, I think the last time I went to TGI Fridays, which was about 6 years ago, I had a cocktail that just it was probably 15 ounces of whatever. And it was crazy,
The Long Island Iced Friday.
I think it was something cheesy like that. It was, sorry, this is a disclaimer. I have so for me, what my presentation is on using alcohol. So I do a lot of tincturing, and tincturing is where I'm taking fresh or dried plant material and pouring alcohol over it to extract the medicinal benefits. Now, it's one of our easiest things to use because it extracts it really well, depending on the alcohol. You get it's kind of like the most bang for your buck. So if I spend a day harvesting black cohosh, I want to get the most out of that root. And that's probably not a great example for your guest, but anyways. Dandelion. So I spend the day harvesting dandelion and, chop it up, and I want to get the most out of it. And so now what I do is I actually throw it in my Vitamix with alcohol and make this slurry of dandelion, and then I filter it out. And I feel like for me, that gives the most strongest and most potent medicine. And that's not always what I'm looking for, but in this case, I am. So I think for us, we need to start looking at how often do we use alcohol, and what are we using it for? That's why I kind of created that fairy cocktail hour, where it's this special time of night where I can just relax and take a breath and just make this beautiful little cocktail for me and only me and the fairies. And I know that probably sounds a little bit ethereal. I can't say that word.
Ethereal.
Thank you. Yes, good speech. But it makes it this special encounter between me and nature that is really enjoyable, because alcohol does mask the certain things. It does kind of calm the body down. It does release the nerve tension. But one of the things we do have to be careful of is overuse causes damage to the liver, for sure, kidneys, major organs. So it also dulls the brain, so we want to be able to support the brain and the liver and all of that. So there's a balance. So one of the great herbs that I use is milk thistle. It's a liver protector, I'll just use it like that, and dandelion. They all protect and restore the liver. The cool thing is that the liver can be regenerated in 5 weeks. So every year we take probably 6 weeks off, of drinking, and just kind of clean out the body. So we do a lot of green juices. We'll do a lot of fresh vegetables, just trying to really pump up the body, and tons of water. And that really, for me, at this point, has worked. And I know when I'm overindulging, I can tell. But I just double up on my herbs, and, I let it go. I don't try to make myself feel bad, because I am human, and it is enjoyable to be a little bit
Sure.
scrappy every now and then.
Oh, absolutely. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't. We'll leave it at that. And the liver thing's certainly not meant as medical advice, but a really good point. So like we have these, we have these organs in our body that are really important for the way that we function. The brain is one of them. Alcohol affects that. The liver is another one. Alcohol affects that. I don't think there's really a bodily system, maybe not even the cardiovascular, because blood alcohol, that's in there. So, I mean, really alcohol affects the entire body. And so, I think that you make a good point. And I think my biggest takeaway is that what you do and the way that you choose to enjoy alcohol in the form of cocktails and make it special is you set aside a time for it. Mm-hmm. And that's something that people should, I think, maybe consider in their own way. I think it looks different for everybody. Everyone's got a different schedule. Right. And I think that unfortunately for some people who are in big cities like DC and who are working as young professionals, as is, I'm guessing many of our listeners are going to either be able to relate to or fall into the category of, we get sucked into this thing called happy hour, and happy hour is really just stress hour because we stress out for 8 hours a day at our desk, and then we go off with the people who we are stressed out with and consume a lot of alcohol because we're stressed, and then we co-ruminate on that stress, which doesn't necessarily make the stress better. At least that's one version of the story. I'm not saying that's for everybody, but what I like to draw the contrast is that your cocktail hour is small. You said that you make small cocktails, which allows you, if you want to make multiple cocktails, you're not going to be on your ass. And what you've done is you've just gotten to be more creative, because I think that one of the things that alcohol does is it makes you less inhibited, more open to creativity.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So
my best blogs are blotto botany blogs, because I'm kind of in that and I'm going to write this out and be happy about it, and I did one last week. It's Tuesday night's my night off, and I've been trying to just kind of stick to that as my little happy cocktail hour, and it's been impressive. And I feel the effects of not wanting to drink on a Friday night and just kind of having that release. I do challenge people to try it and see how you feel. Alcohol abuse is a serious thing, and so we do have to be conscious of it and realize that our bodies are machines and that they need a break every now and then. Take a vacation.
Absolutely. So that's a great answer to the question. Complex answer to a really oversimplified question. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about now cocktails and the medicinal tradition. So you are, maybe this is a good time for you to talk more about the herbal training that you did. And then we've already touched a little bit about how things like bitters and things like tonics, for example, are medicinally based. Is there anything that you can share from your experience or from just historical knowledge that you think people might really resonate with in terms of maybe they go to a bar and they order a cocktail? What unexpectedly medicinal or medicinally related, or you use the term wellness related things are in there that they might not even be aware of? Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I do look at that a lot. I always think of when people come into the herb shop or the in the apothecary, it's kind of like they give me this look, and especially with the syrups, it's kind of one of those things where it's easily accessible. I'm telling you that elderberries are good for your lungs, but I'm selling you a syrup. And I think for me, it's kind of funny because then I back it out and I say, if you think about the properties of the herbs that are all around us. So there's a ton of herbs that are just walking, dandelion, we've said that multiple times. There's mullein root, there's chamomile, all of our medicinal, I just brought Eric a little lemon basil plant, and that's great for the digestive system. And I feel like sometimes when I'm using the herbs in the cocktails, especially fresh, I tinctured off some hops tips the other day just to taste them, just because I wanted to see what they taste like. They're super nutty when they're first coming out, and
they're fresh in the bud. They've got that seed power to them almost, right?
They're beautiful. And then I'll tincture them later. So for example, even hops. We can just talk about hops. Is one of our great nervines. It's super calming. We use it a lot to help people rest and sleep. it just really makes the body come down. That's why if you have 2 beers, you're kind of like, I'm a little sleepy. I might have to switch gears here.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of herbs, chamomile, rosemary is amazing for the brain. I love rosemary cocktails. One of my favorite cocktails is I use the Copper Fox rye whiskey, a little bit of our nettle orange syrup, and a little bit of lemon juice and orange juice, and then a big pop of rosemary, and then the aromatic bitters from Bittermint.
Bittermint aromatic bitters. Yeah.
It's so perfect though. I mean that
sounds amazing.
Yeah, and but rosemary is traditionally used for memory. So I get this all the time. It's so cute. I get these little bundles at the doorstep with people that don't want to throw these herbs out because they know they're good for something, but they just leave them at my door. So I got a big bundle of rosemary a couple weeks ago, and it was actually one of our neighbors. He had left this beautiful flowering, and I tinctured it all, and it made this essence of rosemary that is, I'm using it in cooking at this point because I have way too much of it. Rosemary tincture is now on sale at Wilder's Apothecary.
Get it, people. Let's go.
So, but even that, it's just like we were talking about the creative aspect of it. I think the healing aspect of herbs really blends well because cocktails are an easy introduction to herbs. So my thing is I was harvesting skunk cabbage, which is a very early spring. But we were talking to a bunch of us herbalists from nerding out. And so we were talking about, how there's a lot of bottles with skunk cabbage as a medicinal. And this thing it feels prehistoric. You're like digging in the mud, your foot down, you're still trying to pull out the root to get the cabbage. And it's one of those herbs that you just kind of like, this has got to be good for something, so.
This is not the digression that I expected to have on the podcast, but we're gonna go deeper into the skunk cabbage. First of all, I want a skunk cabbage cocktail.
No, it's nasty. It tastes slimy.
Okay.
Super slimy.
Never mind. No skunk cabbage cocktail. Second, can you talk more about that? Because I grew up next to, I grew up in the middle of the woods, and we had a brook, and then kind of consequently around that, since the land was fertile, we had a swamp, and we had skunk cabbage. And I remember when I was a kid, skunk cabbage, it comes out early spring, and it comes out of the soil almost like a hood that pierces the soil, and inside this hood is this little ball. It looks like those close-up microscope views of what a pollen granule looks like, almost, and it stinks to high heaven. And my guess is that the goal is to attract flies and pollinators in there to pollinate, right?
Probably right.
So what do you? And so, like, as a kid, like, what do you want? You want something that stinks, and you want something that's fun. You can kick over and just have an immediate effect of just ruining the air around you. Yeah. What better pleasure for like a 10-year-old boy with boots in a swamp? So now you know that my childhood was like that. What do you use skunk cabbage for?
It's a lymphatic mover. So all the early spring things that I pull out of the ground are usually lymphatic movers. We call them spring tonics. So it's the dandelions, it is the yellow docks, burdocks, all these weeds that are literally on the side of the road. And skunk cabbage is one of those that I've actually never played with, but some friends and I were kind of in there, and I was like, let's see what this thing does. And tincture, it's an intense little beast, to say the least.
I can imagine it's intense enough.
I was not so keen on getting in there and getting dirty. I was more like, let's go hunt for turkey tail mushrooms. Those I can at least grab and they're delicious versus these little monsters.
Well, that's interesting. And just so folks out there who might not have as much anatomical experience as us, the lymphatic system is basically it's essentially the gutters of the body, which is a really unflattering way to look at it, but it's the part of your immune system that goes about gathering and then disposing of, in a good way, the toxins in your body. So lymph nodes, if you've ever gotten sick and the doctor feels your lymph nodes, usually right on the under the jaw and on the sides of the neck, those are lymph nodes, and you also have them elsewhere in your body. So good to know that spring is a good time for a cleanse and a tonic.
For sure.
So I want to talk now about the concept of simplicity and complexity, seasonality, and balance. One of the questions that I had for you today is really about balance in cocktails as a metaphor for balance in life. And I feel like that's one you could probably run with, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and run with that?
Yeah, I think my thing is with both herbalism and cocktails. It's one of those things where I often go, I'm kind of in this yin-yang balance. And it's a pretty finite balance. But herbs are meant to be extracted. We use multiple forms to extract herbs. So we use teas, like we're having this really good ginger mint tea, and it's really gingery, and I'm feeling a little warm, and I think that's kind of the one-to-one that herbs can give. You eat a cayenne pepper, it instantly makes you warmer. You eat turmeric, it makes you warmer. And so all those bloods, as they're kind of circulating through the system, kind of are doing their herbal magic. I don't know what else to call it. It's basically a synergy through the system, and they're really cleansing whatever they need to. I feel like they hook onto whatever receptors they need to, and they pull out what they need to pull out into the lymph and cleanse it. So I was looking, I scout all the time for different herbs and different patches of things that I'm excited about. And kind of where we are, we're kind of not too far from the mountains, probably 20 minutes from the Thornton Gap entrance. And
of the Appalachians?
Of the Shenandoah.
The
Blue Ridge Mountains.
Gotcha.
Shenandoah Parkway, Blue Ridge Mountains. I don't want to get myself in trouble.
Gotcha.
So I'm often kind of in that, like, what is here? We have beautiful things here, like golden seal and ginseng, that is just really getting torn up by people that come in from the city, and they try to harvest it because it gets in Chinatown, I think it's about $400 to $800 a pound, depending on what it is. And so these medicinal herbs, we're trying to work with people that have land. For example, there's a great organization called United Plant Savers, and if you haven't checked it out and you have land, please do.
Link in the show notes.
Yeah. Sorry, once again, tick. So we have, just places where we can start bringing back our native plants because we have so many invasives. And here's the thing is I use a lot of the invasives. I just harvested honeysuckle to make a beautiful liqueur and really appreciate the essence of that plant. Lilac flowers, harvest those. Dandelion, make your own bitters. Just keep it simple, but then just get started. And you'll start to recognize what those flavors can bring not only into your cocktails, but just into your lives. Just putting, a couple drops on top of a fruit salad of honeysuckle liqueur. I mean, people are going to be like, what is that? Why is this flowery? And it just creates this point of conversation. And I think that's the interesting thing for me with herbalism. And this is where Eric and I kind of connect because he's a slight talker. But, he wants interesting things to talk about. And these things are always poignant and everywhere, and
present. If it's seasonal, then it's present, right?
I'm when I walk through DC, I'm constantly looking at people's yards and looking for things to harvest.
Me too. It's rosemary. Up here on Capitol Hill, it's rosemary. There's so many. Like, I could give you a map of Capitol Hill based on the number of people's rosemary plants, where I just walk by and go, I wish I had a set of clippers right now because they don't need all that rosemary.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm looking for, things like linden trees, hawthorn trees, which they plant. They plant them in the library parking lots because they're beautiful. They flower, they fruit. Ginkgo is an amazing brain tonic. I throw that in the Vitamix with a little bit of alcohol, and I use that a lot.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm going to call out right now by name and by street location. I just walked by yesterday, corner of. Not quite the corner. It's right between East Street and F Street Northeast on 3rd Street as you're going south, or north rather. It's on the left, about halfway up the block. Peach tree. So, you know what? I'm going to keep an eye on that peach tree.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm not above it.
And there's the other cool thing about peaches is, like, we use the leaves as a warming agent, but they're also a bitter. You have to use them fresh. but when they're fairly young, but they're a nice little bitter and they're a little nutty, kind of like the peach seed. So it's like using that kind of stuff to really play with. So there's a lot of that.
And if anybody's noticing a little bit of added noise in the background that I can't edit out, the folks who live above me have just arrived home with their lovely pit bull Buck. Great little dog, but there might be a little background noise. So we're going to keep going. I wanted to just circle back because you said something about the way that you, and this is distinctly not cocktail related, the way that you go about scouting for things. And we just kind of talked about like creeping on people's yards, which is a very like urban or city based way of scouting for things. But you said something really early on that was one of my favorite things, like my favorite phrases that came out of your mouth because it was so simple and true. You said, I see blank, I see something in nature, and I want to put that into my body.
Probably the essence, something in that effect.
I think that's great, and I think that's the reason why I think that's great in relation to what we're talking about with cocktails is the fact that like, going back to the happy hour scene where, maybe there's an oversimplification of, an overutilization of, and an over maybe a use of cocktails, right? In the form of tasteless vodka tonics and, rum and cokes and stuff that maybe isn't the fastest or isn't the most enjoyable or healthiest, but gets the job done the quickest and is the most palatable. You say, in a happy hour setting, I see that rum and coke and I want to put that into my body. And I feel like that's a completely different set of motivations and a completely different set of, I guess, thought processes than when you go out into nature and do what you're describing, doing very consciously and say, I see that and I want to put that in my body. Right. I know, we've already talked about, that maybe, alcohol when used as a drug essentially is a bad thing. But is there anything else you can talk about with your mindset? And like it's a great way, in my opinion, to tie cocktails and the way that you personally, your personal brand of cocktails to a mindfulness. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
I can, because I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been creating this menu that's very seasonal and unique. I feel like it's unique. And using all these books that I've been reading and just kind of feeling like I want to have people experience this. I want people to know what's in their yards or their neighborhoods and get excited about it and realize that even when you're cooking with herbs, if you're putting them in your cocktails, great, but you can also cook with herbs. And we go back to the same thing as like rosemary. Cooking with rosemary is one of the best things we can do for our bodies. It really flushes out our system. It gives our body oxidation. It opens up our pores. Along with so many other medicinal benefits. It's like one of those things where I'm like, my brain's clicking on a certain level and not remembering everything. But just kind of in that way, it's just cooking with them and just being with them and growing them. And for me, it's the mindfulness of connection. When I watch my little seedlings grow, it's one of those things where I watch them come out of the ground and I'm kind of cheering them on, like, come on, buddy, you can do this. You got to overcome the weeds. You got to do this. You got to do that. And then I get to harvest from them and just be in nature. I think we lack that a little bit in this society, is just really finding the connections. And that's where I think the simplicity comes. Like, it's complex. There's so many things we could look at. But the simplicity is with cocktails, if you just do a little mindful cocktailing, for lack of a better word, just have a little one and get some borage and enjoy it and try a violet, try the little purple violet. It's delicious. And just kind of experience your life on a different level and not just the rum and coke down the hatch.
Right.
I've been there, done that. What ends up happening is, you lose multiple years of cognizance because you're just there for the party, so to speak, which is fine on a certain level. I'm just trying to move it into another realm at this point.
Yeah. And I think that's it's a really wise thing to say. And the reason why it resonates with me is because you used you drew maybe without necessarily intending to the distinction between connection and disconnect. So I think if there's one rule of thumb that I can identify, not being a doctor, it's that if you're using alcohol as an escape or a disconnect, if you're using that third Navy strength gin martini as a way to escape your shitty day job, chances are you're not doing it right. Now, this is not to say that martini doesn't taste delicious, because I would, if you offered it to me, I would probably be like, hell yeah, like I will join you for this martini regardless of how many you have had prior to this. But I think there is healthier enhancement to be found when you're using cocktails to connect, and this can certainly be gained in group settings as well. This is not just us trying to expose your personal drinking habits. When you go home to your apartment after a busy day at the office or something, this is across venues and across situations. So it sounds like the bar that you're working on is a good opportunity for the folks in Sperryville to come out and to learn how to connect, not just with different cocktails that they may not have been exposed to, but with the land that they live in.
Yeah. I think for me, just kind of touching back to what you were just talking about, it's just, I feel like alcohol, cocktails and going out for happy hour it's a connection period. And if you're not happy with your connections, then, you need to look at that. And that's what happened to me. I mean, that's why I am where I am now. Not necessarily the alcohol part, but it was more of just like, I'm not living the life I'm supposed to do. And I can't do this anymore. And I'm fortunate enough that I could step out, and try something different. And I don't even know how I got to where I am right now. I don't know why I'm sitting across from you, but I am, and it's effective, and now I'm kind of enjoying every moment of my life versus, a third.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't want to harp on that, but it's one of those things where at this new place and even at my apothecary, I'm trying to create an experience for people to enjoy their lives more. In so many ways, not just the cocktails. It's just, finding something that helps them with stress. Tulsi basil was my savior, and it is literally, it's called holy basil in India. And it's one of those herbs that...
Is that Rama Krishna?
There's four of them.
Rama Krishna.
There's three, yeah. There's Vana, Krishna, and Rama. Yeah. So there's three, yeah. And my favorite is, I think it's Vana. Yeah, there's one of them that tastes a little bit like pickles. This one's not my favorite.
I think it's Krishna.
I think it's Krishna.
Yeah.
But they're all wonderful. But just sipping that at 3:00 instead of having that fourth cup of coffee, that's really what made my change in outlook and body. And I think that the plants were working with me. They were guiding me onto a different path. Scary as shit, but it's working. It's like everything that I keep, if I'm in touch with myself and the nature and my intuition, it seems like my path keeps going in the right direction. Does that sound
right? And scary as shit, meaning that you forewent those paychecks and
yeah.
Luckily you have the support of your husband and your son. Mm-hmm. Obviously it's a family thing.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a theme with us. I'm lucky enough to have a wonderful wife who puts up with the creative, not just puts up with it, but truly supports. The creative and puts up with the resulting chaos in the household that doubles as an office and a podcasting center for the moment and stuff like that. But I want to move on to some lightning round questions. The one thing that I'm going to issue right now as sort of a challenge is, to those of you who are listening to this right now, what I want you to think about is the difference between connection and escape. And I want you to think about, in the way that you normally, or the way that you have maybe in the past couple weeks or the past month, used cocktails. Have you used them as an escape, or have you used them as a means of connection? And the answer to this question doesn't matter. The point is, consider what you've been using cocktails for, and then if you get the indication, if you're being really honest with yourself, that you've been using them as a means of escape and as a way of getting out of what you do most of the time, then maybe this is an opportunity to do a couple of things. One, maybe visit some of the resources on the show notes page, which you can find at modernbarcart.com/podcast by searching for this episode, which is with Colleen O'Bryant, spelled exactly as you would assume it's spelled. And the second thing might be to use that information that you find with all of the wealth of links and other stuff that we put up there, and put some herbs in the cocktails that you're making. And Colleen's she's doing like the excited dance right now. Put some herbs and stuff. I mean, I can't make you use cocktails for connection. Nobody can. But I think what we've learned in this episode is that being in tune with nature and with natural growing things is really fun, really interesting, stimulating in a positive way, and a good conversation piece if nothing else. So have a cocktail with somebody, make them a cocktail, and put some herbs in it and have a conversation. I think that's a simple challenge that I can issue based on what we've talked about in this episode so far. And I hope that you share your results with us on Instagram at modernbarcart, and tag us, hit us up, and we'll check out the awesome cocktails that you're making with herbs. But on to the lightning round questions. So these are pretty short, concise questions, Colleen, but you don't have to answer them in a short, concise way if you don't want to. Short answers are totally fine though. Number one, what is your favorite cocktail? And as I assume is probably the case, if you can't name a favorite of all time, what is the cocktail or a cocktail you've recently fallen in love with?
Well, it's farm season out where I live, so we have been drinking a lot of whiskey sours and pisco sours. The eggs are amazing right now, and then I get to make a lot of custards. But I do add a little bit of a twist on that. So I'm using a lot of chartreuse as my sweetener because I love it, and it has so many herbs and herbal. I'm willing to create it. That's like my goal, is to like recreate it with all the herbs I have in my crazy little apothecary.
This is the project that Colleen doesn't yet know that I've jumped on with, is that we're going to 20 years down the road just come out with this company that has reproduced chartreuse in the United States.
I'm all about it.
Once we're wealthy and have 40 hours a week to devote to copying some ancient monks' recipe.
Or let's just get some monks. Anybody want to be a monk for us?
I would, yeah. Applications are now open at modernbarcart.com/monks.
Yep. Yeah, so that's kind of my thing. Anything to do with chartreuse is my bank. I've been recently experimenting with the Italian Amares. Unfortunately, I'm in Virginia, and we have very limited access to really good, either locally or even just something. They just don't carry very much there. So.
Yeah. And folks, we don't pass judgment on this podcast, but that's what happens when the state controls your liquor supply. Bad things happen.
Yeah.
Not a judgment. I'm just saying objectively bad things happen.
Yeah, it's awkward. It makes it awkward.
Yeah,
when you're trying to build this cocktail and you're like, wait, you don't have any. Okay, well, I guess we'll just make our own vermouth that we want, or and I feel sad because there's so many good producers in DC that are cranking it out that we could use, but we just can't get it. So, anyways, more Virginia spirits at monks.com. So that's kind of my favorite cocktail right now. And then if this girl walks into the bar, actually you taught me this. I order a hanky panky just to kind of.
This girl walks into a bar.
I order a hanky panky just because it's one of those things that I know I'll enjoy, and I like to see how they make it differently in each place that I go to.
Ah, that's fascinating. A couple things I want to latch onto there, and I'm sorry, I apologize for belaboring the lightning round, but a couple takeaways. One, I did not know that you were a chartreuse fan to the extent that you are, because it is absolutely my favorite liquid on earth. So that's a thing we'll have to talk about more. Second thing, sours. You mentioned two cocktails. Sours, basically, folks, a sour is a cocktail with an acid in it, generally lemon or lime juice, and then the base spirit, and then there's egg white in the cocktail. And the egg white, when you put this cocktail into a shaker, because you shake many cocktails with citrus juice, it creates a foam. If you shake it long enough and well enough, then you strain it into your cocktail glass and you have this lovely foam at the top. And that's where the spring eggs come in, correct?
Yeah. It's really light and fluffy. It's not overwhelming. For me, it's a low alcohol, and it's fulfilling. It's like that perfect little thing, and it goes great with all of my little basil snippings.
Oh, and it's great for garnishing on top. You have a nice, nice dark colored bitters that you can drizzle across. And in the case of the pisco sour, that's a very traditional, way of presenting the cocktail. And then, obviously with a nice foamy egg white, you can just slap an herb right on top of there.
Yeah.
Slap it around a little bit, activate it.
I will say that I did find a small new technique. I've been reading way too many cocktail books right now, but I really love using, I got this really good like Japanese frother. Like you would normally use it for coffee, but
matcha or maybe like
no,
green tea. No coffee.
No, it's like a milk frother.
Okay,
but it's a metal round one instead of the whisk kind. I'm pretty sure it will take my eye out or my son's eye out at one point, but it is amazing for making like full on like 3-inch egg white cocktails.
Wow.
Without having to like muscle it up.
That's why they give sons 2 eyes, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Caden will he'll be one-eyed Cade at one point.
One-eyed Cade.
And that's the name of our chartreuse. No.
Oh, amazing. All right, so moving on to the next. Oh, hanky panky. Sorry. Well, Colleen's coughing right now because that really strong tea cocktail. Hanky panky. It's a gin drink with amaro. So it's got gin, amaro, and then is there vermouth in? Yeah, there's a little bit of vermouth in it. A little bit of sweet vermouth, a little bit of amaro, and then some gin and generally orange bitters.
Yeah.
Is the way I've seen it.
Up glass. Super chill.
Yeah.
And it just blossoms.
Yeah, we'll have to return to the hanky panky when we do our amaro episode, but it's an incredible drink. I recommend that you folks look up the hanky panky. It's if you're a gin lover or an amaro lover, it's a great blank slate. In the way that Colleen mentioned it, she said it's her sort of her litmus test for a good cocktail bar, and it's not just a good cocktail bar, but maybe the personality of that particular cocktail bar to see how they approach it. So put a pin in that. We'll definitely that's an approach to going out to bars that we'll return to in future episodes, but I wanted to just mention it here explicitly. So, moving on. Favorite spirit? Do you have one? What do you like about it?
Gin. Yeah. I mean, there's so much I can say about them, and there's so many that I have tasted that I love, and then there's some that I just don't like. But most of them are my favorite is probably the botanist.
Oh man, you're the second person I've recorded 2 podcasts, and you're the second person to call it the botanist, and I've got a bottle sitting over there empty.
I know.
It's a beautiful bottle.
Yeah, and I also really like Uncle Val's gin. I'm in Virginia, so don't judge us. We've got limited presentations.
Based in Virginia, Uncle Val's?
No, it's another one.
Okay.
I haven't really, Copper Fox makes a decent gin that I like for my mixed drinks. It really pairs well with our rosehip hibiscus. And I actually made a killer lemon gin sour with no egg white, but on a highball. I'm not sure what I would call that.
Like a gin Collins or something like that.
Yeah, it was gin Collins with soda water. Yeah. And I plopped down by the river and threw some violets in it.
Yeah.
If you would come out to Sperryville, that's what you'd be drinking right now.
Their gin is really good with lemon. I can attest to that.
Yeah,
I think lemon.
It's got a lot of star anise in it and some lemongrass. I'm actually planting the gardens for that gin, which is really fun. That's what I just love doing, is like connecting, simple things, like sticking in a lemongrass plant for somebody, and then going like, they knew that it would distill well in their gin, but they hadn't like tasted it as a tea. I'm like, here's your lemongrass tea, and they're like, this is delicious. So it's like getting those flavor profiles into people. So
yeah, that's amazing. And of course, somebody who is an apothecary, gin is the perfect answer to that question. Actually, that another place where we intersect. Gin is also my favorite spirit, so I feel like we should make the last word now.
Yeah.
But let's get through these first. If you could have a cocktail, this is one of my favorite questions. If you could have a cocktail with anyone in the world, past, present, who would that person be? Where would you go? What cocktail would you order or make yourself? Paint a picture for us.
Oh, so I have this beautiful picture of, I am such an outdoors person. I love going to cocktail bars just for the experience, but I get super intimidated. I'm an outdoor drinker. slightly day drinker at times. So I think my person that I would go to is Rosemary Gladstar. She is kind of our grandmother of herbalism. And when I read her books before I was an herbalist, I thought they were accessible. And when I read them now, they're even more accessible. And so I'd love to have a cocktail. She has a beautiful farm, and her daughter and son-in-law actually also have a farm in Vermont where I buy a lot of my herbs from. It's called Zach Wood's Herb Farm. So if you are making your own herbal whatevers, check them out because their herbs are amazing and organic and beautiful. And so I think I would like to have it there at that farm and like learn about all the constituents of the herbs that are in the gin that then we're drinking, or, you know, if we could just like flavor profile chartreuse, so that I would love to do that actually as like an herbalist tasting of chartreuse, because we've tasted so many weird herbs.
Like a meeting of the minds,
like just
and a meeting
like
of the tongues.
What do you pull? I mean, you know, obviously there's licorice in there. You know, I'm like pulling like 10 things in my brain, you know, and it's just like one of those things where I'm like, okay, we could make this work.
I imagine this happening in like these like chic modern government buildings, like from James Bond or like the CIA, where you're like all around a whiteboard and you're just like you're just writing down these, or you're like just obliterating these monks' centuries old recipe with scientific tongues and an amazing experience. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Except I'm more like around a fire and we're all like just passing the bottle.
Yeah.
I live in the country,
that's why you need really, really weird people like me to make that connection and get you into that government building somehow. We'll make it happen one day.
Exactly.
Are there any cocktail books that have been particularly influential? And I know that you've mentioned that you've been reading a lot, so I'm hoping that you can give maybe multiple shout outs here to the listeners who are, you know, interested in either learning about how to make cocktails, how to make cocktails that incorporate herbs. What do you got for us?
I think the one that I recently have been really enjoying is the DIY Bitters by Jovial King and Guido Macy. They're both juggernauts in our industry. Jovial and Guido, they actually are in Vermont, and they do Urban Moonshine, who makes a fantastic... They use it mostly for digestive bitters, but obviously digestive bitters can translate into cocktail bitters. I use their chamomile. I did one cocktail. It was a brown cocktail. And I lost that bet. But you do a little spray on the top, and it just kind of gives that essence of chamomile, which is really calming, but it's also super aromatic. So their book, I've been reading, and I am bad at names, so we can connect to these.
We will hunt these down, folks, and give you links in the show notes.
I think it's Liquid Intelligence.
Yep, Liquid Intelligence. I have that here.
It's driving me crazy.
Probably the best executed technical guide with images and illustrations for doing high level things with cocktails. I wouldn't recommend this as somebody's first cocktail book, but if you've gotten your feet wet and you want to have something on hand as not only a book that you can read straight through, but as a reference guide to techniques, not necessarily to cocktails themselves, although there are some recipes in there, but to techniques. I recently took it out with my wife. We were making a homemade orgeat, which is an almond-based syrup used in a lot of tiki cocktails, and we referred to a lot of the scientific information in this book. So a great technical guide for sure.
Yeah. And so that's kind of I've been doing that one, and then Amaro, and he's made another book, Bitters. It's like those one word.
B.T. Parsons, or is it Bitterman?
It might be Bitterman.
Mark Bitterman wrote the Bitterman's Guide to Bitters and Liqueurs. Brad Thomas Parsons, I believe, is also...
Yeah, I think it's Parsons.
He published a book recently called Amaro.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying that. For me, it's connecting the dots of herbalism and cocktails and kind of knowing what's in there. And then I just start extracting, what we use the different herbs for. Licorice is one of my favorite herbs too, and it's in all of those liqueurs.
Have you read Amy Stewart's The Drunken Botanist?
Of course I have. Yeah, she's awesome. I love the way she's just like a powerhouse in creating more. And she's just inspiring a lot of us to really put our stuff out there and not be shy about it, because Drunken Botany is great. There's also And her blog is Ginger Tooth and Twine, I believe. Ginger and Tooth and Twine. She writes these little, and when I refer to blotto botany, she is actually publishing a book in hopefully next year, all about herbs and cocktails. And I'm crossing. She's a really good writer, really personable. And then the other person I really love for just creative, she is West Coast, so she has all these like super awesome things she can play with, like prickly pear and octillo and all this stuff that we don't have.
Yeah.
But it's Emily Hahn, and it's Wild Drinks and Shrubs. I was a recipe tester on the book. It is every technique you want to know about creating not only just syrups that you can just put in fizzy water. Trust me, those are like just as good. Mocktails are my friends. And just really good techniques. So
Can you get me on the next book tasting list? Okay, that's good. Good answer.
I got it. Yeah, for sure. She's awesome.
So for those of you listening who are inspired by the herbal aspects of this podcast episode, I would recommend the first thing you pick up is Amy Stewart's The Drunken Botanist, because the unique thing about that book is it's something where if you have that energy inside you right now where you're like, okay, my life is going to be different after this because I'm going to go out and start getting into some of this stuff, you immediately need to hit up that book, because it is something you can read straight through, because it is separated into sections. Like, it talks about the constituent grains of spirits. So like it talks about wheat, it talks about barley, it talks about corn, the things that they actually distill the spirits from. And then it talks about fruits, it talks about barks, leaves, herbs,
sarsaparilla.
Just like all of anything that comes out of the dirt, it talks about, but it does it in a really organized way. And as such, it remains a really useful reference piece for you. I know I return to it often as I'm trying to develop some new bitters flavors. I return to it very often. And there are cocktail recipes in there. They're not the main focus, but there are cocktail recipes that reward you as you kind of read your way through. So I highly recommend Amy Stewart's The Drunken Botanist as a beginner text on herbs, and then we'll have links in the show notes to the rest of these texts, and you can check out the previews, et cetera, et cetera.
Very cool.
Yeah. If you could give any piece of advice to someone who is just starting to build their home bar and learn about cocktails, what would that advice be?
Buy chartreuse.
Buy chartreuse. Save up your pennies. Save up your pennies because it tends to be expensive.
And don't share it. No, I'm teasing. I think, actually, I will be honest. One of the things about the limitations of Virginia is that what I'm finding is making your own. You know, playing with, at our shop, we have a ton of teas. And so we're doing like an Earl Grey infused vodka, which is super simple. And I think I learned this from Liquid Intelligence, but just like you don't need to brew it for very long and it adds so much flavor. So I even did just a 8-ounce pint glass of I had this beautiful jasmine tea, but I only had like a smidgen of it. And I just put that in there for, I think it was like 6 minutes. And it just the tea blossomed. It added that floral note that I was looking for, because it was like a couple weeks ago and we didn't really have very many flowers. And it was beautiful. So infusing, playing with cheap vodka, the one that I use, and I don't know if you agree with me, but is locust. It's a potato vodka from Russia. It's super cheap.
Must be a Virginia thing.
It's smooth, and we'll link to the show notes.
Sure.
And it's super smooth, and I use it for most of my tinctures unless I use it for Everclear.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely something to get into if you're getting started in cocktails and want to add, like, if you want to pretty much 10x your creativity, or at least the appearance of creativity, by doing one simple thing. It's by infusing some spirits and doing stuff like that. So Wild Roots Apothecary is definitely a good start for inspiration, so you should check them out. Colleen, how can people get in touch with you, check out what you're doing, whether that's via the interwebs or social media? Yeah,
well, I will say this, we are doing some definitely some bitters classes, but we're doing it in the country. It's hard for me to get in here. So we're doing some wild food harvesting classes, some medicinal herb classes, some herbal first aid classes, and then also some really good, cool bitters classes, because it's so important that we include bitters in our diet and learn really about what's around us. So we're starting to do that. So you can find us on the interweb. We are on Facebook and Instagram. I'm pretty big on Instagram. I mean, not big, but I definitely use Instagram a lot for our pictures, because it's a visual medium. medium what I'm showing you.
And is that wildroots_apothecary?
It is, yeah. And then on our website at wildrootsapothecary.com, and then we'll soon be posting up more cocktail recipes at barfrancis.com.
Is it bar-francis.com?
Is it dash or hyphen? I feel
not
like
quite sure.
I'm not either.
Anyway, maybe you can just type that into Google or Bing or your search engine of choice, folks. So, Colleen, is there anything else that you wanna tell people before we sign off here?
Yeah, and not in a big way, but if you are interested in this, I am always up for mentoring or coming out for an internship day, which means you'll be mucking around in your boots and chopping shit up. So, always looking for people to come out and help us. It's a beautiful medium, and I'm so excited that it's being resurrected in so many ways. There are great herbalists in DC and Baltimore, and if you are looking for somebody to connect with, we are very open people. So just give me a holler. It's hello@wildrootsapothecary.com, and I will respond back as soon as I can. But come out to Sperryville and visit us for sure.
And folks, you know that's a good email address when it's the email address that I email her at. So thank you for tuning into this episode. I know that it's a little bit more alternative in terms of what we spoke about, but I think that is precisely the value. So thanks for listening, and I will see you next time here on the Modern Bar Cart Podcast. Hey everybody, thanks for listening. I just want to remind you that this episode might be over, but the journey and the discussion are just beginning. If you're excited about the content in this or any other episode, please tell us. Follow us on Instagram at Modern Bar Cart for recipes and great product tips, or stalk me personally at Quixologist. That's QUIX-ologist. You can also like us on Facebook by searching Modern Bar Cart, or hit us up directly via email by sending a note to podcast@modernbarcart.com. That email address, by the way, is also the one you should use if you've got any cocktail or home bartending related questions you'd like us to address, or if you think you have a unique perspective on the cocktail world and would like to be interviewed for all to hear. I'll see you next time, but until then, drink responsibly and experiment boldly.